I think the 44 Magnum makes a lot of sense for hunters, for people that are in the woods and might encounter some very extremely dangerous game at close range. Not a bad way to go at all. Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I would like to transport us back to 1955. Elmer Keith, the same Elmer Keith who helped develop the 357 Magnum, was at it again. The rancher turned big gamesman and big game hunter, as well as revolver guru, took some of the same concepts that he used to develop the 357 and applied them to make perhaps one of the most powerful and popular handgun calibers in the world, the 44 Remington Magnum. What he did was go back to his old playbook and use a 44 special round, lengthen the case a bit, put more powder in it, different powder blends to develop higher pressures, and developed the 44 Remington Magnum. An interesting concept all the way back to one of the reasons he chose the 44 Special as the parent case was, one, there was a lot of different projectile weights available in that caliber compared to the 45 Long Colt, and also the cylinder walls were thicker on the 44 Special. So what that did was allow you to experiment more safely with thicker cylinder walls before creating a catastrophic failure. And one of the other interesting things, just like with 357 and 38, by lengthening the 44 case, now it becomes impossible to chamber it in the 44 Special revolvers because of the length, and that also became an added safety feature. The round debuted to the world in January of 1956 after Elmer Keith and another fellow had already gotten a model from Smith & Wesson, which would become the precursor to the Smith & Wesson Model 29, which is this guy here. This is a stainless -2 version, but you can tell this would have been all blue and basically identical. The world recognizes that particular revolver because in 1971 it became the focal point of Clint Eastwood's Dirty Harry movie franchise. During that franchise, he stated that the 44 Magnum was the most powerful handgun cartridge in the world. And at that time, that was probably true.
Being this is a 44 Magnum, the most powerful handgun in the world, and would blow your head clean off. You've got to ask yourself one question. Do I feel lucky? Well, do you, punk?
In 1971, it exploded in popularity, but up until that time remained pretty much a niche caliber relegated to people that, one, had close encounters with big game, potentially perhaps guides or outfitters or ranchers, or people that just had interest in handgun hunting as a hobby. The round remained incredibly effective even against game as large as elk. In fact, there has been notable harvesting of even a polar bear with the 44 Remington Magnum cartridge. How do you develop all of that power? Well, it's pretty simple. You ramp the maximum pressure up to 36,000 psi. You get a medium heavy bullet weighing around 240 grains, and you launch it downrange at up to 1,300 feet per second. Now, what that does, depending on the load, of course, is give you between 750 and 1,500 foot-pounds of energy. People have even tweaked the caliber to get even more power out of it, and stopping short of saying that it'll knock a deer off its feet, it is an unbelievably lethal hunting handgun cartridge. But like anything, if it's good out of a 4, 6, or 8-inch barrel, it would be better out of a longer barrel. As early as 1959, Ruger invented the Model 44 as bolt-action rifle, and Marlin started using the 44 Remington Magnum in their 1894 series of lever guns. The performance, of course, got even better. It is extremely effective inside of 100 yards. The problem for the 44 Rem Mag after that is trajectory. Because of the relatively heavy weight and not super fast velocity that you would say get out of a rifle round, it has a tendency to die off after about 100 yards. In fact, most people would list its practical accuracy at no more than 150, and at that range, you're still going to notice somewhere between 6 and 8 inches of drop. So an incredibly effective bullet at the right range. However, that range, by some people's standards, is pretty limited. I know a lot of people that aren't super comfortable getting 50 yards away from a Kodiak when he's not in a good mood. Specifically, the round measures 0.429 in diameter and 1.61 inches overall. I know there's a little bit of confusion about why it's not actually measured at 44 in diameter. Well, it's because it kind of goes back to that concept we talked about earlier about heeled bullets. The inside of the case is 429, back to the old 44, 40, and perhaps 22 long rifle deals where they're the same diameter as the outside of the case. So that's not a new concept for most people that have been watching the series. As time went on, the 44 also proved that it was extremely adaptable. What happened after a period of time was, this is a Ruger Super Redhawk double single action revolver with scope mounts built into the receiver. Ruger originally made this in the Blackhawk version. I just didn't have one available for me to use today, which of course is a single action, more of a cowboy style gun with a flat top. Also an excellent revolver. This would be the Model 29 from Smith Performance Center. You can tell it has weights to counteract the unbelievably large recoil impulse. Also some scope mounts and a red ramp front sight. I've actually shot this gun before. It's an excellent shooter. After the Model 29 and its iconic rise to fame, thanks to Clint Eastwood and the Dirty Harry franchise, came this, the Desert Eagle. This, of course, is from Magnum Research. I would argue that this might be one of the most recognizable semi-automatic handguns ever made. Of course, in 44 Magnum with a rotating bolt design allows you to shoot the gun way more comfortably than you can even out of a much heavier, larger revolver. These are a lot of fun to shoot, terribly expensive, but if you have the means and feel like testing your manhood, this is a good way to go. Awfully fun afternoon, believe me, I love this gun. And very accurate. The 44 Magnum, in my opinion, will continue to be probably the most powerful handgun cartridge available. As time went on and science changed and metallurgy changed, you can get more powerful rounds in the same size revolver. For instance, the 454 Casull, the 500 Smith, on and on. However, those remain even more niche than the 44 because you don't see a lot of rifles that go with, which is an excellent idea if you're thinking about it as a hunter. Clear back to the 44-40 days, having a rifle chambered in your handgun caliber just makes a lot of sense. You don't see a ton of rifles out there chambered in 500 Smith. And at some point, one has to ask themselves, how much power do you actually need? I've shot the 500 Smith, and to be quite honest with you, it's literally like taking your hand and slamming it down on the table as hard as you can. And a cylinder's worth of ammo is going to cost you right around $20, which doesn't mean that the 44 Remington is cheaper to shoot or cheap to shoot. However, it is cheaper than some of the more powerful handgun cartridges available now, which isn't an insult or a slight to those calibers. From my point of view, I just think if you have a round that's capable of killing a polar bear at a fair distance, I just don't know how much more power one would need. And then it just becomes more of a manly man ego sort of situation to me. I think the 44 Magnum makes a lot of sense for hunters, for people that are in the woods and might encounter some very extremely dangerous game at close range. Not a bad way to go at all. And there are a lot of options for you in some smaller versions that are more easy to carry, which we'll cover when we do the everyday carry portion of the video. What I'd like to conclude by telling you that Elmer Keith stuck to what worked. He caught on to something with the 357 Magnum, became extremely popular amongst police forces and civilians, and then for hunters started to develop, of course, the 44 Remington Magnum. it never really caught on with police departments because of the violent recoil impulse and the idea that the gun has to be incredibly large for the time frame that we're talking about. It doesn't really have much of a police application unless you, of course, factor in the whole Hollywood point of view. I'm glad it made the caliber as famous as it did, because I believe a lot of people have actually enjoyed it not only for hunting, but occasional target shooting. And I do know people that use it as an everyday carry gun, although I'm not an advocate of that. To each his own. I hope you learned a little something about the 44 Rem Mag. And if you continue to like the content, please like and subscribe.